I was in Los Angeles not long ago, and I drove over towards one of the buildings that I used to live in. The building was horseshoe-shaped, and I lived in an apartment at one corner, and the people who lived across the courtyard from me were a Hasidic Jewish family. On Friday nights, I would enjoy sitting in my living room with the patio door open, smelling the night blooming jasmine, and hearing them sitting around the Sabbath table singing traditional songs. And it got me thinking about open windows and what I heard and smelled through them. Now, I grew up in suburbia, and we had central air conditioning, so we never really had open windows in our house. But we would go and visit my grandparents in the Bronx, where there wasn't air conditioning, and the smell of cooking from various cultures, mostly heavy on cabbage, would drift through the windows, as well as people arguing loudly in a multitude of languages. Now, just because we didn't have open windows, though, didn't mean I didn't get to hear anything at home. My street, Carolina Avenue, was across the street from a well-known nightclub, the Action House, 50 Austin Boulevard, Island Park, New York. You can look it up, and it's an infamous place in rock history. And even though as children we were obviously too young to go to a nightclub, we weren't too young to go and stand outside the door while bands rehearsed in the afternoon. And we'd often go after school and stand out there where the door was cracked open, and I heard everybody from Vanilla Fudge to the Doors when I was growing up. The reason why the Action House is notorious is because of the 27 whiskeys Jim Morrison drank the night before their concert and then turned around and asked for another 27. Now, the Action House was responsible for another type of noise we heard on our street, because at the other end of Carolina Avenue is Long Beach Road, and across Long Beach Road was the Plantation Motel, known locally as the John Smith Motor Inn, after all of their customers. People would meet somebody appropriate at the Action House, and then they'd zoom down Carolina Avenue to the Plantation, and they were often not really in a condition where they should be driving. There wasn't an alternative to coming down Carolina because all of the other streets in our neighborhood were one way in the same direction. So there were a lot of accidents on our block, and one of the common sounds we heard was the crash of metal and the sound of ambulances. All of this background prepared me well for college when, again, I couldn't afford air conditioning, and I had an upstairs neighbor who blasted rock music loud enough that my books would actually walk off of their shelves. And there was often a crash of metal because we lived near a bridge that was just about passable by a truck when it was full, but many drivers would attempt it when they were empty. So often I would have a friend visiting from out of town who would hear a tremendous screech of metal being sheared off the top of a truck and ask, "What on earth was that?" Only to hear, "Oh, it's nothing, it's just a truck crashing into the bridge." "What do you mean, just a truck crashing into the bridge?" "Oh, it happens all the time, don't worry about it." The other thing that the sounds I heard in college prepared me for was calling 911, because those open windows also left us vulnerable to crime, and I ended up having to make that call whenever somebody attempted to steal my housemate's television set or some other loose object. They usually wouldn't get away with it because it was too difficult for them to lower heavy objects down 3 stories. Well, calling 911 proved to be a useful skill through much of the rest of my life. Unfortunately, that was often because of sounds I heard that involved the thud of somebody being thrown across a hallway by one of their relatives, or in one case, a next-door neighbor whose husband attempted to throw her off of the balcony until the police showed up. I began to think that maybe my family had had the right approach in keeping shut in with air conditioning. But then I was visiting my mother and I was talking with one of the neighbors, and I discovered that they knew about everything that went on in every house, even though they had been sealed within. And they started telling me horrifying stories about things that had happened to people I grew up with. When I went back to Los Angeles, I was over at my friend Penny's house, and we were sitting in her living room. There was a nice scent of citrus flowers drifting in through the open windows. She had some neighbors who were part of a cult that believed in chanting for wealth, and you heard this hum that I always interpreted as, "Give me money, give me money." And there was the faint sound of another neighbor's daughter practicing the flute. And I realized that if you shut your windows to all of the horrible sounds out there, you also shut your windows to the flutes and the chanting. So I keep my windows open. I do wonder if my next door neighbor's dog could get laryngitis sometimes, but I can hear there's a woodpecker in one of the trees in our courtyard, and there's either an owl nesting there or one of my neighbors has a truly disturbing vocal habit. But I am going to go and continue keeping my windows open and letting the world in. Thank you.